Everyone, welcome to Mint Title's first Google Hangout. We're joined here with other business development rep Katie Thornell, and also the owners of Mint Title, Chris Watters and Tim Heyl. So thanks for joining us, guys. We have a few questions that we've been getting from a lot of agents here in the Austin area. Wanted to ask you guys if you could kind of give people some perspective as to how you were able to grow your businesses so quickly, and when you did certain things and made certain decisions within your own business. So Katie, go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, sure. So guys, whichever one of you wants to grab this question, please feel free. I know that you both own real estate companies, top producing companies in Austin, Texas, and expanding. So I really value your insight on these questions. So the first one is, at what point do I hire an assistant? And is it an assistant that I hire first, or is it an ISA, or what does that look like exactly?
You want to take this one, Tim, or you want me to go?
Go ahead.
So, I mean, Nick and Katie, I'll bring up a really good point. It's about doing the right things in the right order. And I can't speak for Tim, but for myself, I've failed and landed on my face so many times. It's just unbelievably frustrating. And I don't know if anybody's put together something from IKEA before. Like, bought some furniture from IKEA and tried to put it together, and you don't follow the instructions, and you're like 3 steps ahead, and then you got to disassemble the entire thing to put it together correctly. I mean, it's literally the exact same thing in growing a real estate business. So it's all about doing the right things in the right order. And so your first hire most definitely should be an executive assistant, and it's a function of how many transactions you're doing. So once you get to doing about 2 to 3 transactions consistently per month, it's really hard to go above that without an executive assistant. So it's, unless you're working 90 hours, 100 hours a week, it's going to be really difficult. If you want to have a life and be able to, have your freedoms and, keep a normal work week of 40 to 50 hours a week, you got to hire an assistant if you want to consistently be producing more than 2 to 3 transactions per month.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a little different of a spin, although I completely agree with what Chris said. For me, the first hires that I made before an executive assistant weren't full-time hires on the team. The first hire I ever made was a coach, hiring a coach just to help me, and that was a 30-minute phone call once a week. It was somebody to help guide me through, and I know, Chris, probably that was the same for you, right? Hiring a coach when you were an individual agent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say one of the big kind of game changers for me was getting somebody that had already been through this process of figuring it all out, and being able to talk to somebody like Nick and Katie and get the advice so that I didn't make the same mistakes my coach did, for example, when he was building his business.
Right. Yeah, so that was the same for me. I mean, I needed to learn scripts. I needed to learn dialogues. I needed to have somebody to throw objections at me and help me overcome those objections and hold me accountable to actually doing the things that I knew I needed to do. So that for me. So whether you can find an accountability partner or a coach or somebody who's been through it, like Chris said, that would be a huge first step. And I'd recommend paying them or they've got to have some skin in the game. They've got to be getting something out of the relationship as well. Otherwise, there's no accountability on the coach's part or the accountability partner's part. So I've had so many accountability partners in the past that have fallen apart, and they never worked out long term because at the end of the day, they weren't as invested into me as I was and as they needed to be. So paying somebody or having somebody have some skin in the game on the other end of that is huge. And then the second thing for me was I hired a virtual transaction management company. So I didn't have any money to hire an assistant yet, and I knew an assistant was the first appropriate hire, like Chris mentioned. And yet, because I didn't have the money, because I wasn't doing enough deals, I still wanted to stay in the zone of lead generation every day. I still wanted to be, 4 to 8 hours a day on the phones, generating leads, building my business. And the only way to do that, as I started to get listings and put properties under contract, the only way to do that was to outsource the contract management and a lot of the administrative paperwork and things like that to a transaction manager. And so I found somebody locally here in Austin, Texas, who I'd never met her in person, but she charged, I think, $350 or $400 a deal. She charged me at closing, so I didn't have to pay her until I made the commission. And I just invested. I mean, I went all in with that person so that none of that paperwork ever fell on me. I remember sitting in a class at Keller Williams. It was the How to Get Paid class, and it was where they taught us how to fill out a green sheet so that we could get our disbursement authorization form and get it to the title company. And I literally almost got up and quit the real estate business on my first week because I said, "There's no freaking way that I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm terrible at details. I'm terrible at paperwork, and I can't do it." And so I went and just hired this person, and they ran it. They took the ball and ran with it, and they were actually training me as we went through the process. They're coaching me and showing me what to do and how to do it, and basically taking care of 80-90% of it. So it allowed me to continue being on the phones, generating more business, and actually is a huge piece of how I was able to launch into early success that I think that Chris and I both had, was that we didn't spend too much time in that 80% paperwork arena.
Yeah.
And then,
awesome.
of course, the next full hire is that assistant.
Yeah. The next question is a little layered. So basically, in order to make $100,000, how many homes do you need to sell? How many clients do you need to take? Appointment set, nurtures, call time. That sort of formula, basically the exact formula that they would need in order to get to $100,000 in.
Not everybody wants to produce at as high of a level as others, and so they need a quick formula that they can do to determine how many hours they need to spend lead generating, how many nurtures, how many contacts, how many appointments, so they can hit their goals. Can you share with us what that formula looks like for each of y'all?
So I think it's going to depend on who I'm talking to, and what our company and team takes to the bottom line from a profitability perspective is probably a small fraction of what the average agent is keeping. So what you have to ask yourself to figure out what does it take to get to $100,000 is, number one, as an agent, what are your strengths? Like, for example, if you grew up in West Austin and you have a huge database of people in West Austin, and that's a strength of yours, is that you have this big database that you can nurture, then you should really focus on the high-end market. And if my goal is to make $100,000, then I only need to sell 4 to 5 homes a year that are $1 million a piece. So I think to get to your $100,000 goal, first examine what your strengths and weaknesses are. I guess specific to me, we help the average consumer that's buying a $250,000 home, and so our gross commission check is roughly $7,500. Now, again, like I mentioned earlier, the percentage of the revenue that you keep is all a function of how much you're reinvesting back into the business. What you're spending to get those leads. I mean, there's so many variables. It's really difficult to answer that question. So I don't know what you want to add, Tim, but that's.
Yeah, I mean, Chris and I both kind of abide by the Gary Keller's MREA models, right? The lead generation model and the budget model, and although the budget model, it's different for, just like Chris said, it's different for every team and every business, but it's a good place to go back and look at that as kind of a framework for how you might want to build things around. So what we know is in the budget model, Gary suggests paying your agents 30% on average per deal. So that would be maybe 50% on buyer deals and 10% on listing deals, or 40 and 20, or however that looks, but he suggests about a 30% cost of sale. So right off the bat, a team like Chris's or a team like mine is going to make 30% less instantly than an agent who's doing the deals themselves and not actually going and paying agents on their team, right? So the cost of sale isn't even there. And then Gary suggests spending about 30% on your overhead. And so 30% on your overhead, it's really basic. It's really 3 main categories that you'd want to spend. Your 10% on salaries, 10% on lead generation, marketing, and 10% on operations, right? Operations would basically be everything else. It would be your rent, your technology, your supplies and equipment, and professional services, accounting, CPA, all of that type of stuff. So 10% on operations, 10% on lead gen, 10% on rent, and then an average, if you're building a team, an average of about 30% to the agent, which could leave you with about a 40% net. And that would be a really, really good net for a real estate team. So regardless of all that, let's just say you're an individual agent, Katie, just jumping out into the business, and you want to make $100,000. You're starting fresh, right? Starting completely from scratch. The way I would start is I'd backtrack. So start out, write down the number, 100,000, and then I would say, okay, well, the average commission in Austin is about $7,500, right? It's about $250,000 average sales price. So it's about $7,500. So what you could do is you could say, okay, what's 100,000 divided by $7,500? That would be about 13 or 14 deals, right? 13 or 14 closings. However, in Austin and in Texas in general, we have about a 10 to 20% dropout rate when we sell a house and put it under contract. We have about a 10 to 20%. Chris, I don't know what you're seeing, but are you seeing somewhere in that range, 10 to 20% dropout?
In terms of like taking on a listing and it failing to sell?
No, putting a house under contract and it actually canceling, it actually coming out of contract.
So
like,
I mean,
no, my team doesn't have that, Tim.
The number that we track is what's our expired ratio. So like how many listings do we take that end up failing to sell?
Right.
And so for us, that number is really low. And typically the reason a listing might expire is because a seller's motivation changes, or they can't accomplish their goals, or they can't get the price they want. For example, offers are coming in well below what they want. And so, so with that being said, to your point, let's just say it's hypothetically a 10% fall off rate. If you need to close, what'd you say, 13 listings to make 100,000?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is you probably really need to actually get 19 to 24 under contract, because if you get 19 to 24 under contract, after some fall out, you might only end up with about 13 to 14. You see what I'm saying?
So yeah, for our team, we don't track what percentage go under contract. We just track what percentage don't sell.
Gotcha. All right. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, 95% of our listings are selling. So I basically, if I take 15 listings, I know more than likely 13 of them are going to sell, and we'll make $100,000 in revenue.
There you go.
Gotcha.
So there's but that's revenue, right? So
exactly.
That doesn't include any of your costs. Now, what happens is a lot of agents brag about how low their overhead is. And the challenge with that, the challenge with being proud of having super low overhead, is that you may not be spending in the growth of your company or the growth of your career. So for me, I didn't spend 10% on lead gen when I first got in the business. It wasn't necessary because I had a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of money, right? So I always say when you start out in the business, as a business person in general, you either have time or you have money. And when you first start out, you have a lot of time, no money. And eventually you sell a bunch of houses and you have less time, you have about the same, and then eventually you have a bunch of money and no time, so you pay for everything. And so what happens is when you get in the business at the beginning, what I did, and what I know Chris did as well, because we met around this time, instead of spending our money on lead gen, we spent it on training, education, coaching, right? I mean, we spent what we would have spent on generating leads, since we were doing it ourselves by picking up the phone. We spent what we would have spent on leads just on training events and coaching events and seminars and all types of education. And so what I would encourage everybody is, even though you won't have the cost of sale at the start, I would go ahead and budget 30% overhead. So plan on only netting about 70%. As an individual agent, plan on netting about 70% of the total gross commission. So if you want to make 100,000, you'd actually need to sell 30% more homes. So you may need to sell right around that 20 or 20, maybe somewhere around 2 a month to be able to net that 100,000. See, what happened for me is I made the mistake of not paying attention to that. I had a goal my first year in the business to make $100,000, and unfortunately, I actually grossed $130,000. but 30,000 of it went to referral fees to relocation companies and agents, and then 50,000 of it went to my overhead because I was investing in training and coaching and signs and lockboxes and Keller Williams events and brokerage fees and things. And so I netted 50 grand. So I netted half of what my goal was because I didn't plan, and I actually hit the number of units that I thought I had to hit, but I didn't plan appropriately. So I didn't come anywhere near what I really needed to do. So I would just say plan appropriately and think about those fallout rates, those drop rates. Fortunately, we're in a great market today, so the fallout rates aren't like they used to be when we first got into the business. But the market could turn at any moment, and that could change. So go back to the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book, and it'll give you industry averages for how many homes you should expect to sell for every listing you take, how many homes you should expect to fall out for every property you put under contract. They'll give you industry averages that you can use when doing your own math.
So that's great information. Just to make it even more challenging for you guys, what would you recommend, knowing that the goal is, let's say, 20 listings a month? How much time do you spend on the phone to get X amount of listings each month that you know are going to stick? And would that really have more to do with skills and quality? Yeah. I mean, what are we looking at there in that question?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of like, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of like backtrack to when I was really getting rolling in 2010. And basically what my day looked like, and I think, for everybody listening to this call, at the time, Tim and I didn't know each other, and we ended up competing on the same listings, but Tim and I never knew each other before that. And it was just a weird coincidence that we were kind of doing the same thing, and we had no idea who each other were until we started finding out when we were getting interviewed for the job of selling somebody's home that the guy they're trying to decide between was me or Tim Heyl. So to backtrack to 2010 and to get back to that point, what I was doing was I basically at 7:55 every single morning up until 11 o'clock, I had no distractions, and I was 100% focused on prospecting on the phone. So in 2010, the market was terrible. There were lots of expireds, withdrawals, for sale by owners. So I was going after all the low-hanging fruit and prospecting those people 3 hours a day like clockwork. And I never missed a day. So my goal in that 3 hours of prospecting was to try to set one appointment per day, like one confirmed appointment that I actually would go on. So over the course of a month, I would go on roughly 20 appointments. I'd actually set a lot more appointments than that. I typically set like 2 to 3 appointments per day, but when I did the research on the property, a lot of times the sellers were upside down and they didn't have even the ability to sell. So out of those 2 to 3 appointments, I'd usually get one really good qualified seller to go meet with. And then out of those roughly 20 people over the course of a month that I'd meet with, I was converting anywhere on a low end of 8 listings up to, I think my best month was I converted like 14 or 15 listings out of those 20 appointments. And, just varied month to month. It was a function of the people I was meeting with, how motivated were they, how realistic were they, how well did their goals align with how the market was back then. And, obviously if I wasn't competing against Tim, my ratios were going higher.
So it's funny you bring that up because, from my perspective, Chris and I, we had never met, and what happened was I went from a period of time where I lost every listing appointment I went on to a period of time where I never lost a listing appointment I went on. And again, that goes back to the training and coaching, and it honestly goes back also to having a really, really rock solid presentation. Having an unbelievable listing presentation changed my world. And so when I actually got one together, I went from losing every appointment to winning every appointment. And all of a sudden, I would get a couple of losses here and there. And I was tenacious. I would call back. I would make sure that the seller told me who they hired, why they didn't hire me, what happened, what did I do wrong, because I didn't ever lose an appointment. I got to this point where I was in my groove. And every single time it was Chris who beat me. So it got really frustrating, and I started to actually get I started to actually get a little bit of a chip on my shoulder for losing these appointments to him. And I remember there was one appointment, Chris, and I think I've told you about this before, but I can't even remember. There was one that I called the guy and I said, you know, John, have you made your decision yet? Because he had told me it was between Chris and me, and he wanted to think about it. And he said, you know what, Tim, you know, y'all were both really great, but I have decided to go with Chris. And I got in my car and I drove over to his house and I knocked on the door. And I told him I wouldn't leave until he signed my contract.
I literally remember who this guy is. It was like this really cheap property out in Manor, and the guy coincidentally lived in South Austin. I thought I had this deal locked down, and then I find out he signed a listing. I was like, what the?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So I mean, you know, and Chris, I think the same. You know, we didn't want to lose to each other. This was. You know, every deal that he beat me on was money out of my family's pocket. As far as I was concerned, you know, I was taking it personally. And then one day we met at a friend of ours, a mutual friend. We met at a happy hour and started exchanging ideas like we're doing today here on this hangout, and started asking each other about our businesses and realized that we were so like-minded and had a lot of the same goals and a lot of the same values and we're doing a lot of the same things to grow our businesses. We just kept meeting and we kept talking and we kept just masterminding and sharing ideas with each other, and that turned into one thing led to another, and next thing you knew, we wanted to get into business together in some way, shape, or form, and that's kind of the birth of Mint Title. But kind of going back to the question of, you know, how much lead generation do you actually need to do? For Chris and myself, it wasn't really a measure of, it wasn't necessarily a, let me run the math and see if I have to do 2 hours or 3 hours. It was kind of, you know, when I had no clients, I was 10 hours, right? I was all day long, and then
do as much as you need.
Yeah, and then I had nothing else to do, right? So, and don't get me wrong, I wasted 6 months, you know, like a lot of new agents do, being misguided. You know, I was ordering business cards and designing logos and building websites and putting my database together that I never called, and you know, I was getting ready to get ready. I wasted a lot of time doing that. But once I really got into my groove, I didn't have any clients, and I realized this is my job. My job is to go out and get business. And once I get business, then I'll have 2 jobs, but until then I only have 1 job. So I spent 10 hours going out and getting business, and then eventually that went to 6 hours and then 4 hours. But I drew a hard line at 4 hours, and I said I'm never going below 4 hours. So from 8 to noon every day, it was 8 to 11 was lead generation, and just like Chris, I had the same goal: get an appointment, get an appointment, get an appointment. Right? So 8 to 11 was lead gen, and then 11 to 12 was lead follow-up. Because after you lead generate for so many months, you eventually have leads that want you to call them back. Right? So 11 to 12, that was how I was able to sleep at night. Was I actually had a CRM, a contact relationship management tool. Right? I had a CRM. At the time, it was Top Producer. That's not the one I would use today, but at the time it was Top Producer. And I would put all the contacts in, and I would write all the notes of everything we talked about, and I would schedule a follow-up call. And when I'd schedule the follow-up call, because I knew every day at 11 o'clock, that's when I dealt with my follow-up, I could sleep every night. But prior to doing that, I couldn't sleep at night because I knew I had a lead on this piece of paper and on that sticky note, and I had one on a napkin in my car, and they were everywhere. And I literally couldn't sleep at night because I remembered all these people that I had forgotten to call back and lost opportunities on. So once I got organized into a CRM and actually committed to my calendar, it was a game changer. So what I would say is just plan on blocking. If you don't have any clients, spend your whole day generating business. And if you do have clients, draw a hard line at 12 o'clock and say, up until noon, I have nothing else to do. I'm a business owner and I'm a real estate agent. But unless you're on a team, if you own your own business or own your own practice, you're an entrepreneur. So you actually own your business, and you're the technician in your business. So you got to draw a hard line and make sure that you commit to spending appropriate time doing both.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So if you guys were to build another team from scratch, what would the 3 most important things you do be?
The 3 most important things to build a team from scratch. Well, go ahead.
So, I mean, I guess like our conversation just a minute ago, the caveat I would say about all those hours of going on appointments and prospecting, you know, like Tim said, I had the same issue. For 6 months, I'd call, you know, thousands of people, and I'd get like 6 listing appointments for the entire month, and I'd lose all of them. So if I was starting from scratch, the thing I wish if I could have gone back in time and done over was to get a coach or get involved in a mastermind session. I think a coach is probably the best way, especially if that person coaching you is getting something of value in return, because they're going to do a better job holding you accountable. So that would be number one. And
yeah, so I would go ahead.
Yeah, I think number two is identify what database you're going to be prospecting. So if you have a lot of time but no money, you've got to create a very inexpensive database to go after, because you can't spend money on TV or magazines or any of that kind of stuff. So I think the second thing I do is identify a database of prospects. So, I mean, for an example, you know, maybe you get a database of everybody that's a doctor in the city, and you know about some great loan program for doctors that are just getting out of college, and can help them get qualified for a loan, even with their massive amount of debt. And this actually does exist. So you build a database of all these doctors, for example, and you know you call them and you prospect them and pitch them on this loan program and helping them get into home ownership to reduce their tax liability, you know, as they're starting to make a lot of money in their career. So I mean, that's one idea, right? I mean, there's so many different niches and so many different types of databases you could build. You know, it doesn't have to be expired to withdrawals. Obviously, the expireds and withdrawals, they're very challenging to call right now because there's very few of them. Back in 2010, when Tim and I were doing this, there were tons of them. At the beginning of the month, on the first of every month, there would be like 150 to 200 leads pop up on the very first day. And then every day thereafter, there were 10 to 20 people that were expiring and withdrawing in the MLS. So the market being really good, that's a very challenging list to prospect, and you don't have enough prospects. Like in an 8-hour day, you wouldn't be able to fill your entire 8-hour day just prospecting expireds. Even if you like built a database of all the expireds for the last 2 years, after a couple of months, you're going to call through that whole database. So number two would be identify the database you're going to be working, if you're going to be lead generating. And then you know, number three, I think to Tim's point, is you know, get a CRM system to help you organize all that data and you know, help you implement this you know, prospecting methodology, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. I know a lot of people right now are looking towards the baby boomer generation and are specializing in helping older people find homes and relocate in that regard. So I think that's another great little niche to look at too.
Yeah. So I would agree with Chris, pretty much everything he said, but I'll put a different spin on mine, I guess. Definitely number one would be hire a coach, no question about it, because that's the one thing that fixes everything else. It's the one thing that's gonna help guide you when you don't know the answers to everything else. Hire a coach. Don't hire any coach. Hire a good coach. So go do your research and find somebody who's been through it, who knows what they're doing, and who can guide you through that process. The second thing I would tell you is identify what success looks like on a daily basis to move the ball forward. So for me, there was nothing I hated more than driving home at the end of a day, at the end of a long 12-hour real estate agent workday, and feeling like I didn't move the ball forward. You know, I was busy all day long, but I didn't actually move the ball forward. And so what that looks like is maybe, you know, I was negotiating an inspection and scheduling photography and doing all the, you know, getting repair amendments done and going to closings and doing all these things that I had to get done. And yet I knew in the back of my head that I didn't do my lead generation, or I didn't do it to the extent that I needed to get it done. And it wasn't until I became crystal clear about what daily success looked like. So like for Chris, he said one appointment. If he could get one appointment that he could actually go on, then that was good. Then he felt good about his lead gen for the day. For me, I had actually adjusted it a little bit to, as a newer agent, you might not be able to get that one appointment every day, especially in today's market when there's so few expireds. What I would focus on is a certain amount of qualified seller leads that you can add to your pipeline on a daily basis. So Gary Keller tells us your database is your business and your business is your database. What he means is the only value that you truly have other than your job, the value of what you're building, the asset of what you're building, it's the quality of your database and the size of your database. So every day that goes by, your database should be getting bigger and the quality should be getting better. So what you want to do is you want to identify a number. So for me, I called them a nurture, a seller nurture, which was just a qualified seller lead that met certain criteria that I had. And so my goal was get 5 a day. And if I could get 5 a day, that wasn't a big number. It didn't seem like this massive number, but if you run it out, 5 a day is 25 a week. That's 100 a month. That's 1,200 a year. In 3 or 4 years, I woke up and I had like 5,000 nurtures, 5,000 qualified seller leads that I already spoken to sitting in my pipeline. So I would have to be, almost an idiot not to be able to sell a couple hundred homes a year when you have 5,000 people that want you to call them back and list their home, right? So 5 a day will get you there, and it'll get you there in less than 5 years. So, but the thing is, if you only did 3, if your goal was 5 and you only did 3, don't leave. Don't stop working. Don't stop your lead gen to move on to the next thing until you get your 5. You got to be committed. So that's the number one. The number 2 thing I would say is get clear about what daily success looks like to move the ball forward and be committed to it. And then the last one, the third one, I would say is just I forgot. I had it in my head. Go ahead.
I mean, the thing I would add to your list that would be number 3 for me is reminding myself that the fortune in real estate is in the follow-up. So what Tim's saying about building this nurture database, so Tim's goal was to build 5 nurtures. If I look back and think about something that I did a bad job of, it was, if somebody wasn't ready to list within 90 days, I was letting them go. I was looking for that instant gratification to set that appointment right away, and I left so much on the table for potential opportunities in the future. And if like Tim said, instead of, you set a daily goal of setting 1 appointment that you actually go on, but then you also differentiate these nurture leads, people that at some point in the future will want to list their house. If you can kind of segregate that database and work on the follow-up of that nurture database, that's where you're going to get a massive amount of momentum, where in a couple of years you're selling hundreds of homes.
Yeah. Well, and Chris, you mentioned a really, really important phrase, which is instant gratification. And too many real estate agents in our industry fall prey to that instant gratification. So if you can be comfortable with the fact that you might have to put in a ridiculous amount of hard work up front for what might be 6 months, and it might be 2 years and 6 months before you really start to earn that fortune and start to really feel it growing. If you're willing to have that delayed gratification, you're going to succeed in this business. Well, what I've seen over the last almost 6 years now, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of real estate agents get in the business, do the right things for a short period of time, get frustrated that they don't see it paying off, and bounce. And what Chris and I both have done really well, in the midst of doing a ton of things really, really badly, what we've both done really, really well is just be consistent over a long period of time. And I say long, over a few years. To be consistent over a few years' time, and that's a huge key. And I remember the third thing that I did want to mention is go get a killer listing presentation, because if you can get a killer listing presentation, at the end of the day, now it's just how many people can I get in front of who will hear me out. And once you're super confident in that listing presentation and you're clearly explaining your value as a professional, you'll be dying to get on the phones to get people that are willing to hear you out. It was when I didn't have a killer listing presentation that I was afraid that I didn't get on the phones. I had excuses for myself because I didn't really have anything to tell the seller. And once I really understood how to clearly articulate what it is that I do and how I have a unique competitive advantage over other real estate agents, that's when I was excited to jump on the phones, and that's when I started crushing it. So I would say go find somebody. And Katie, I know that's one of your specialties is the listing presentation. So find somebody if Katie's the person, or if you've got somebody else that you can go to that has a really good listing presentation that they're willing to teach you, learn it and master it, and go from there. I think that's a really, really powerful thing.
Awesome.
Awesome. So this is the last topic that we want to cover here, and it's talking again about expanding your team, hiring ISAs, buyer agents, and really getting a better perspective on what type of compensation model you would offer or suggest, and also what type of benefits or leads are you giving your buyer agents specifically.
Great.
You want to go first, Tim?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I think for Tim and I, our answers are going to be completely different. So it's really up to you to decide which direction you want to go. There's a couple different ways you can manage compensation for buyer agents, listing agents, inside sales. I think before diving into that topic, the most important thing I have to encourage everybody on the call to pay attention to is Tim and I keep reiterating how important coaching is, and so through coaching, it's going to help you with scripting, objection handling, and mastering these different areas of real estate. So, I would never go hire an inside salesperson to be a full-time prospector if I hadn't mastered it myself. You need to master it yourself to be able to train and hold someone else accountable to the job. So I think that's number one with inside sales. Like, that's such a hot button word right now in the industry, is to hire somebody in inside sales, but you'd be making a huge mistake to just throw money at it and expect that person to figure it out. Even if they have inside sales experience, you'd be making a huge mistake. So make sure, number one, you understand how to do it yourself first before you hire somebody else. So as far as the compensation model, I've tried a couple different strategies. The first one we tried was a draw. So very similar to what a builder does, and basically it was a draw based on a $30,000 salary, and the inside sales associate got 10% of the gross revenue generated from his efforts. And then as he built the database, his commissions would pay back that draw. Very similar to what a new home builder does with on-site sales reps. So I've used that one, and it works great. That's a good way to do it. Another strategy is you offer a market-based wage for that position. So, for example, you go out in the marketplace and you do research and find out what are inside salespeople making in your city. What are the Fortune 500 companies paying inside salespeople? Because you don't want to offer somebody a salary that's significantly below the market-based wage. You're going to get really lousy inside salespeople. So make sure you offer a market-based wage if you're going to do a salary plus commission. So the way we have it set up, another way we've set it up is we've established a $40,000 base salary, and then they get a 5% cut of the gross revenue. And then another option we've pursued is a little bit lower of a salary, and then the commission split, instead of them getting 5%, they get 2.5%. So we've tried a couple different ways. It's honestly, they all worked. It's all about just identifying the right people and doing a great job at training them and holding them accountable.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think Chris did a great job of explaining it. Only one other way I would throw out there, and we've done it very similarly to Chris as well. One other way that I would throw out there that we've kind of tested lately is as you're building your team, you may want to hire an agent, but you may not be ready to have an agent join your team yet. Or you may be wanting to hire agents, but they're not ready to join yet because they're not experienced enough. So what you could do is you could kind of combine your talent pool with the inside sales role and start building your talent bench while you build your listing funnel at the same time. And the way you could do that is take a real estate agent, maybe newer in the business, 1099 them, call them a junior agent, and basically put them in a 6-month paid training program where you're going to essentially train them and mentor them to be an agent on your team in 6 months, but you're going to pay them per nurture or per appointment that they are able to put into the pipeline. So you could pay them $20 or $30 per lead or something to that extent. Look at how much you're paying for leads in other areas and say, well, if they could cold call and find me a qualified lead, I'd be willing to pay them X amount of dollars per lead. And so if they could get you, find a win-win. If they can get you 5 a day and you paid them, $25, that would be like comparable to a $2,500 a month or something similar to that. Could be it's not a ton of money for that junior agent, and yet it's better than zero, which they would be guaranteed as a real estate agent, right? So it's a way to bridge the gap, let them make a little bit of money while they're training and learning, and then they come onto the team, they go to full commission, come onto the team, and you compensate them as an agent on the team from there.
Okay, so let's say that you get somebody like that and they graduate to be a full-fledged buyer's agent. Do you have a recommendation for splits for buyer agents?
So,
yeah, go ahead.
It's really kind of a function of how much value you're giving the buyer agent on your team. If you have a buyer specialist on your team, for example, and you're paying for their office space, you're paying for their business cards, you're providing leads. Literally, they have no out-of-pocket expense. They're going to get a much lower split than if they were to join, Keller Williams, for example, as an independent broker. As an independent agent within KW. When you join KW, for example, and I'm not in Keller Williams, so I'm not a part of Keller Williams. Tim, you obviously know a lot more than I do about KW. But it's my understanding with KW, there's a 70-30 split. You as an agent, you keep 70%. But also as an agent, you are responsible for all these different tasks of like running your own business. Whereas if you're a buyer's agent on a team like my team or Tim's team, for example, we're covering all the expenses for you to operate under our team, and we're kind of taking on this big risk, and partnering with you and spending all this money and training you to make sure you're successful. So the commission split's going to be, in our case, in our team, our buyer agents get a 50-50 commission split on that deals that they convert that are generated through our various marketing avenues, like all of our sign calls, our internet leads coming in. They're going to get a 50-50 split. And then for our team, I don't know how you work it, Tim, but on our team, we have a lot of listing clients that are selling their home, and they're going to turn around and buy. And so with those specific events, obviously we just hand them off to the buyer agent on our team. So there's no work required, right? There's no prospecting. Literally they show them, 5 to 10 houses, and they're collecting a commission check. So in that case, the agent gets 40% of the gross revenue. And literally they're just, showing them a couple houses, negotiating the contract, and then they turn the contract over to our transaction coordinator who handles everything from contract to close. So, for people watching this video, you just need to take into account the value that you're providing the agents on your team, whether that's a listing agent or a buyer's agent, and that's ultimately how you'll determine how much the split's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to piggyback that, I guess I'll make one little comment. Like Chris said, it's all about value, right? So, Katie, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but back when you were an agent on our real estate team, Katie was the #1 listing specialist on my real estate team before she joined Mint Title to train and work with agents. And when she was there, Katie was able to make a 6-figure income on a 10% split because she was at a period in time the sole listing specialist. So every listing that the Heyl Group generated went to Katie. Now, if I went and offered one of my other agents 10% for a listing, they'd laugh in my face because to take one listing, that doesn't make any sense for them. And yet for Katie, it was a period where you had so much support on the front end, the back end, every which way, you were being fully supported to where you could go out and do, Katie, in your first year in the industry, what, 22, 24 million in sales, in listing sales? So, you knocked it out of the park and were able to do really well on that split. And so it just depends. Like Chris said, it's all about value, and it's all about, as a team, as a rainmaker, as a business owner, what can you provide? If you can't provide much, you're going to have to pay a higher split. If you can provide a ton, you'll pay a lower split. But it's got to be a win-win, right? It's got to be a win for the agent just as much as it is a win for your bottom line. So if you put a split in place and you don't provide enough value for that agent to be able to hit their financial goals, that's not a win-win. It's not going to work. It might work in the short run, but it's going to fall apart, right? It's a house of cards. So the other thing I would say is, agents listening to this that are newer in the business, when agents always ask, Tim, should I go on a team, or should I start my own team? And something I would just throw out there is, if you weren't in real estate, would you be starting a business, or would you be going to work for a company? For me, and I know for Chris as well, one of the reasons we're really similar is we're both entrepreneurs. We both, at heart, love taking risks. We love it. It's exciting for us. It's fun. We're always thinking about new ideas and new ways to create unique value. And I mean, just an entrepreneurial spirit is something that's deep inside of both of us. And for a lot of successful team owners, you find that common trait. And so, if you weren't in real estate, if you would be starting businesses and have that entrepreneurial spirit, start a team. And if you weren't in real estate and you would be going to work for a larger company, to have that support and to have that to have somebody else taking those risks and all that, then don't feel like you need to be an individual agent just because that's the cool thing to do. Being on a team, if you're on the right team, there's a lot of huge upside to that. And what I would say is, even though I am an entrepreneur at heart, if I could go back and there was a team that was set up at the time that was set up like there are teams today. I mean, even 5 years ago, there just weren't teams like there are today. But if there were, I would have jumped on one. I would have gone there. I would have learned. I would have trained. I would have learned everything I could. And if that person continued to provide me opportunity, who knows what would have happened. But if they didn't, at least I would have been on the fast track to learning and could have moved on and probably gotten a faster start even from there.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, last question real quick. So do you guys believe another real estate company can be successful if they don't follow the exact criteria that you did? And if you do believe that they can be successful without following the same way you guys did, do you have any recommendations?
So, I mean, the industry has been sliced and diced so many ways, and there's so many different ways to make money in the real estate industry. So, you absolutely do not need to follow the advice of Tim or I. I mean, you could, come up with a completely different business plan, a different business model. A lot of people might think it's unusual that Tim and I, as two fierce competitors, partnered up at Mint Title, and we are constantly sharing ideas. And a lot of people think that's unusual. Like, why would two competitors work together? And the thing is there's an abundance of deals out there, and I've got a pretty big team now. We're going to do over $100 million in sales, but in the grand scheme of things, that is a small, tiny little sliver out of the Austin, Texas market. So, I think anybody in Austin or in any market, you really should have a mindset of abundance, because it's out there for the taking, and it's just about taking action, getting coaching, your mindset and all these things. But from a business fundamental perspective, I mean, you can break it down however you want, and you definitely don't have to follow the model in the Millionaire Real Estate Agent. You don't have to follow the team model. I mean, you can come up with your own plan. The things Tim and I are implementing are things that he and I learned independent of one another through coaches and through being part of these national mastermind groups where we're connecting with other people that are producing at a really high level, and that's where we get a lot of our ideas. And actually, not to go on this piece about Mint, but that was kind of the reason for Mint Title, was like we wanted to provide a lot of value to the industry and to the community, and raise the bar and the standard in the industry by helping educate and coach other people, kind of similar to the dynamic Tim and I had when we were building our business. And there wasn't any more of a fiercer competitor from my perspective than Tim, but we were openly sharing our listing presentations and sharing ideas, and it's just about constantly evolving and improving and trying to push the envelope.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I hope that if you're watching this, that you'll subscribe to more of these, because the whole goal of these Google Hangouts is going to be to see how many different ways you can succeed in the real estate business here in Austin, Texas. So ideally, Nick and Katie and Chris and I will be interviewing the best of the best at open houses, and the best of the best at at door knocking, and at internet lead generation, and farming, and direct mail, and find people locally here who are succeeding at high levels in areas that Chris and I have never touched or have never done well in. Chris and I, it's funny because if you know me, you know that I'm horrible at so many things, but I've learned a couple of things really well. I've learned a couple of key disciplines and a couple of key strategies, and I can do those well. And so it makes me look like a really smart guy sometimes, when in fact I'm pretty average in a lot of areas. So what the goal if you subscribe to these Google Hangouts is you'll be able to learn about all different ways to succeed in the business, and hear it from people who are doing it right now today, and ideally grow in your own business, train and be coached with Nick and Katie's help as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining. Again, we have Tim Heyl, owner of the Heyl Real Estate Group at Keller Williams, and Chris Watters, owner of Watters International, joining us. If you guys have any questions of things you want to learn more about the real estate industry, feel free to send them to either Katie or myself. That's nick@minttitle.com or katie@minttitle.com, and we'll be more than happy to cover those on the next month's call. So thanks for joining, and we look forward to listening to you all.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, great questions. Keep them coming.
You got it.